Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Chess DNA, and what I have decided is to cover a little bit more of positional chess. And what has inspired me is this book, which I'm reading these days, is called the Grandmaster Chess Strategy, which is full of the Swedish Grandmaster Ulf Andersson's games, and a lot of his games are great positional masterpieces. So the first chapter in this book is called Playing Against Two Weaknesses, which highlights the principle of two weaknesses. And I covered the first game from this chapter in my previous video, so do check that out as well. Today, I'll be covering the second game in this chapter, in which Ulf Andersson masterfully uses the principle of two weaknesses to beat his opponent very easily. Looks like he just did it so effortlessly, but let's go to the game and see what actually happened. Knight f3, the Reti system, is what Ulf Andersson starts the game with, which is also my main repertoire with white pieces as well. And his opponent plays knight f6. And c4, transposing into the English opening, which is basically the top recommendation of a lot of repertoire creators, that against knight f6, you just basically play c4. Against d5, you get a more flexible options, like you get more choices. You can play g3, e3, b3, and also even d4, so many options. But against knight f6, you basically just transpose into the English opening. c5, going into the symmetrical variation, g3, g6, keeping everything symmetrical. And here Ulf goes b3, bishop g7, and bishop b2. So this is called a double fianchetto system, because this action of moving the g pawn or b pawn forward and then putting the bishop on g2 or b2 for white, and of course for black is also fianchettoing. So this action of moving the g or b pawn forward and putting the bishop to the square where the pawn vacates is called fianchetto or fianchetto. I don't know, but this is what it is. Knight c6, bishop g2, castles, and d6. So this is now the king's Indian defense. You can see that black fianchettos and then pushes the c pawn forward. In the king's Indian, you just do the exact same thing. And sometimes you push the c pawn forward. Sometimes you push the e pawn forward. Nevertheless, it is called the king's Indian defense for black. And d4 by white, transposing right into the main lines of the double fianchetto system against the king's Indian. And the idea for white is to play d5 and kick away that knight from the c6 square, where it's sitting quite naturally in its home square, right? So c takes d4, knight takes d4, and developing this light square bishop to the d7 is the main move in this position, vacating the c8 square for the rook so that the rook could just join on the semi-open c file and put its influence there. Knight to c3, developing another piece into the game. a6, just taking away this b6 square from these hungry knights who wanted to get to the b5 square later on, but here a6 just stops that. But now rook c1. Moving the rook to the semi-open c file before committing anything with the e pawn. Queen a5, just waiting for this knight to move away so the queen can munch on this pawn on a2. e3, just adding one more defender to the knight, which was getting a little bit scared on the d4 square because it was under attack by this knight. This bishop could be just taking an aim at the knight. So e3 just adds another defender to the knight. Rook c8 and a3, and now white is threatening to play b4, kick away the queen, and just gain a lot of space on the queen side. Rook b8 in anticipation of a future b5 advance for black, and simply improving rook to e1. Now black improves his light square bishop, attacking the queen on the d1 square. So Ulf Andersson just moves his queen one square up on the d2 square. So here, player with black pieces who has a very tough name to even pronounce, Krunoslav Hulak. Scary name to maybe sound like, but not a scary player for Ulf Andersson because he's just feeling very confident in this position. White does have a slight advantage. Queen h5 with the anticipation of maybe putting the bishop to h3 and trade off the bishops there. Maybe queen f3 after trading the knight on the d4 square, which happens in the game, by the way. So knight d5 by Ulf here, just launching his knight to the d5 square, creating some of the threats on the b6 square. Also, if this knight ever moves away, then there's threat of taking on e7. So knight is just much better placed on d5 square. So his opponent took no time to take that knight. Pawn takes, and here it's important to not take with a bishop, which is also like fine, but if we are really learning to play positionally, then d5 is a much stronger move, because here we are making that knight move away from its natural square on c6 and opening up the c file, so the rook gets more activated there. And we also gain a lot of space with this pawn, and it creates more chances for white here. So if bishop had taken here, you can imagine a scenario when black would just go e6, bishop goes back, and the position would still be like hard to make any plans in that position, because the c file is still closed. And what do we really achieve by capturing with a bishop? Although the computer highlights it to be just a fine idea as well, but just a positional player would just capture with a d5, make that knight move away, like forcing the trade of knights. Bishop takes, and queen takes d4. And here black just decides to trade on more pieces. Bishop f3. And this rook c4 move is a beautiful collinear move, just moving the rook on the c file, but not really capturing that rook. Because if you capture that rook, let's say rook takes on c8, then rook takes, and black wins the control of the c file, which is something we don't want. What our idea should be is to double the rooks on the c file. So rook c4, preparing rook e to c1 to double the rooks. But here opponent actually decided to play queen f5 after trading the bishops. Why not to take the rook, which by the way would have also been fine. Queen to c4, queen captures c4, and you win the control of the c file. And the queen would be very happy to jump on the c7 square, hitting the rook, hitting the pawn, maybe doubling its influence on the c file with rook to c1. And if, for example, b5 is played in this position, then c6 is a weakened square, which the queen would love to grab, attack a6, and following it up with rook c1 is just complete domination on the c file. So here what happens is that opponent just plays queen to f5. So if rook ever takes, rook replaces it, because it is now guarded or reinforced with the queen on f5. But Ulf Andersson just doubles the rooks on the c file. Queen goes back all the way to d7 and e4. Now it's a nice principle that when you have your pieces optimally placed and they're just doing absolutely fantastic, active, and they're just adding maximum influence, optimal position for the pieces, then you start slowly improving your position with the pawns. So that's why e4 is played, f6, dropping the queen back and tripling up on the c file here, creating a threat of capturing the rook on c8. So rook takes, queen takes, and his opponent decides to bring the king towards the center. Still, the position is absolutely equal. Like, just white has more chances in terms of infiltration on the c file. But that's just one weakness. That's just one weakness. White is having the control of the c file and black is weak on the c file. But that's just one weakness. The purpose of showing this game to you is to teach you the principle of two weaknesses. So let's see how masterfully Ulf Andersson creates another weakness and puts more pressure on the second weakness that he creates. And you can see you will see the position for black automatically collapses. So first of all, like I said, when your pieces are optimally placed, you just want to take away squares from your opponent. Like this g4 square, queen has access to that square for no reason. So we go h3, take away that square from the queen. And then after f5, which is a move criticized a lot in the book by the author, that it weakens the king side for the black a lot. And if black just decide to do something very passive, like maybe just trying to move this pawn forward to b5, I mean, the queen always just has a c6 square. So here black decided to play a little bit more actively, but it backfired. f5 and rook to c3 is played instantly by, I mean, I don't know if instantly, we have no time records of the time situations of such an old game of 1980s. But in the book, it says that rook c3 was instantly spotted by, I mean, this is the idea. Once you're just weakening the king side a lot for black, you see the tension exists between the pawns. Rook has the possibility of swinging over to the f file, and that's where the second weakness of your opponent will lie. So king safety might be the second weakness. Pawn takes, oops, just spoiled it a little bit, but okay, I'll just go back. So yeah, and here queen takes e4. Rook to f8 in anticipation of maybe using the rook on the semi-open f file, because black saw he's got nothing to do on the c file. a4, again, pieces are well placed. You just don't want to give free squares to opponent's pieces. So there was this b5 square available for opponent's queen, so you just take it away. And then king g7, g4, just advancing with these pawns and slowly marching forward, pressing forward on the enemy position. Rook to f6, and I would really encourage you guys to pause the video in this position and find the best move that you would play if you were playing against this Krunoslav Hulak guy in 1983. So I hope you guys pause and try to find this move. It's a small, subtle move. I mean, whenever these creators on YouTube ask you to pause the video and find the best move, usually it is a sacrifice or some creative genius tactical idea, but queen to d4, we need to find these kind of moves in our games to win the games, because this is the move that really puts a threat for your opponent. You pin down that rook, and the threat is to play g5 and simply win that rook. So opponent goes g5 in this position. And again, I would really appreciate if you pause and try to find the follow-up that Ulf Andersson prepared in this position. What would you do in this position if you had white pieces? So I hope you guys found this beautiful f4 move. Again, not really crazy tactical sacrifice or just, you know, boom, 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 boom move, but a positional advance for the f pawn, because now it is combining the positional chess with tactical chess, by the way, because if you take the pawn, then g5 just wins the rook because it is pinned. So opponent, of course, just played h6 and now f5, gaining more space, clamping down on the king side here. And here opponent is just suffocating. He's got no more moves that actually, basically opponent has no plans, and white has more space advantage, control of the c file, weaker position of the enemy king, just using the fact that black is weak on the c file and is also weak on the king side with less space. And first of all, starting to create weaknesses and fix them and attack them. So queen b5 attacks that weakness. An opponent actually plays rook f7 here and sets up a little threat that if Ulf Andersson had taken this free pawn on b7, then opponent would have queen a5 in this position, attacking the rook and just maybe having some chances, but still white is just doing great. Maybe in this position, let's say, so first of all, like Ulf Andersson plays rook c4. He's in no rush to take the pawn on b7. If he had taken on b7, he was still winning. But he understands that the b7 pawn is going nowhere. So let's improve the position of the rook a little bit more. And then opponent actually played this tricky move, king h7. Again, setting up a threat that if Ulf Andersson takes a pawn now, queen h8 is coming with some idea of giving a lot of perpetual checks, although still great for white. But if Ulf Andersson is just a master of positional play, just plays queen c3, takes away the h8 square from black, repairs any kind of like rook c8 in the future. So queen goes to g8, and he doesn't rush with this move just yet. So he goes rook c7, attacking b7, b5 takes, and simply queen to d3, attacking the b5 pawn. And here king h8, grabbing the b pawn finally, and now using that. So basically, you guys can see how masterfully Ulf Andersson converts, transitions from one type of advantage into another type of advantage. So first he had the control of the c file, then he pushed his pawns on the king side and started to, you know, play a little bit of cat and mouse on the king side. And once he created two weaknesses, his opponent's piece coordination just collapsed and could not defend the pawn on the queen side. And now Ulf Andersson has been able to successfully transition his advantage from superior control on the c file on the queen side to an extra pawn. And now he just uses that extra pawn and starts to create more weaknesses for his opponent by trying to push that pawn, brings the rook back to the c file to defend, and then just this beautiful b5 push, wanting his opponent to take on b5 so that he could play queen e6, pin down the rook, and then he controls that c8 square, and rook c8 is coming with a deadly attack. At least black would have to lose the rook in that case. So he goes h5, and now just a nice way of trying to liquidate the position further. Although computer might give like f6 to be a more superior move, but this is a safe way of just trying to liquidate the position and have an extra pawn, which is definitely going to promote in this rook and pawn endgame. So his opponent declines the queen trades, goes queen b1, queen e4, some repetition of position, but in this position, h5, king g7, and f6 check, and opponent resigns. So the issue is that if you just take that pawn, then queen takes on e7 is coming with winning the rook at least. Like for example, king goes anywhere, but first of all, rook c8 check, so your own rook is not hanging, and it is in fact finishing in a mate in 2. And if you just take with a pawn, then queen to g6 check is a mate in 3. I'll encourage you guys to pause the video and find the beautiful mate in 3, because we should never be forgetting the tactics with the positional play. So yeah, that will be all for today's game. I hope you guys enjoyed. I will be covering the next game hopefully tomorrow. So it is basically a series of games that I'm learning from this book called Grandmaster Chess Strategy in order to help you guys improve your positional play, because tactics everybody can learn. Everybody can do puzzles and just improve the tactical play, but positional chess does require a lot of knowledge, understanding, and appreciation for these games that we'll learn from these grandmasters from the past. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video. I'll see you guys in the next video.